Good day, everyone. Thank you for attending the Vista conference. My name is Velarde. I'm a sport ethicist and a body sports official. I hold a Master's of Arts in Sport Ethics and Integrity from KU Leuven, and I'll present my research about the fairness perceptions of the paraswimming classification system for athletes with physical impairments. If you are new to paraswimming, please take a moment to differentiate among the following paraswimmers impairments who competed in the S5 final of the 50-meter freestyles at the Paris 2024 Paralympics. And after looking at them and noticing the differences, what questions come to mind from your perspective? At first glance, it looks like a fair competition where all competitors share the same or similar impairment types. In this case, you can see the winners that were in the podium, that all of them have disarticulation of the shoulders. But this race is not meant for a single impairment type. An array of eligible impairments are not present in this medal event among the top 8 fastest times, as you can see there on the screen. Even though we cannot disregard the sporting excellence of these para athletes, it raises questions about the basis on which the sport class allocation occurs during athletes classification and how to promote a level playing field. In Paralympic sports, classification systems are designed to group athletes so that the impact of impairments on performance is minimized. These systems are sport specific. However, there are ongoing concerns about whether these systems are truly fair and evidence based. My study aimed to explore how fairness is perceived in this context, compare fairness perceptions among para athletes and experts, evaluate related ethical concerns, and suggest an approach to assess fairness in paraswim classification, intersecting scientific evidence and ethical philosophical scholarship. This approach or research was made through a mixed research method. A qualitative design was used since the study focused on individual perspectives based on participants' experiences. A descriptive case study methodology was applied to present a complete description within the context of the paraswimming classification process. I conducted semi-structured interviews with 14 participants with continental representation and various eligible physical impairments. I complemented the interviews with an exploratory data analysis of paraswimming performance and a transversal document analysis. Classification at the international stage in paraswimming can be summarized as follows. A physical assessment to verify the presence of an eligible impairment consistent with an underlying health condition. For example, a limb deficiency due to an amputation. And a technical assessment focused solely on how the eligible impairment affects the ability to conduct sport-specific tasks. For example, technical proficiency to ensure that it doesn't affect the sport class allocated. Finally, the observation competition is meant to ratify the outcome of the classification. This is performed by an appointed classification panel. Moving to my findings, the data analysis includes the following themes: the classification process itself, athletes' experiences, firms' perceptions, ethical concerns, science-based approach, geographical distinctions, and areas of improvement, which I'll present individually. Within the classification process, sport class allocation and re-evaluations were the main concerns. For athletes who are members of powerful nations that have a national support system already in place, and let's say, for example, the UK, United States, Canada, and so on, will have their members or athletes to rely entirely on their NPC's involvement for their pushback if a sport class that wasn't expected is being given. This represents a disproportionate imbalance in comparison with smaller nations that don't have the means to cover the protest fees and appeal a sport class allocation for its reevaluation. An expert confirmed that indeed the protests made are related to the outcome of the class because the rules allow for this protest. By a shared interest to reach the podium, reevaluations are subject mainly based on financial solvency. It can provoke an increased workload for the classifiers appointed to any specific event and exceed their capacity in that same event. Reflecting on athletes' experiences, having a foundational knowledge of classification and awareness of what it means to be classified will impact the overall experience, independently of their stage in their sporting career. When lacking knowledge, our athletes might agree to undergo the tests without questioning and not understanding of what's being involved. This scenario is most likely to occur with youngsters or new paraswimmers who have unclear expectations, as mentioned by the Czech participant, who states that he was not educated well enough. In contrast, the indirect knowledge that support staff can bring to the table as part of a support system will lead to successful classification, as mentioned by the Colombian participant. And when it comes to comparing perceptions of fairness, there are mixed feelings among our athletes, which will depend on the objective understanding of their own medical condition against the subjectivity over other competitors. The Swedish participant with a disclosed spinal cord injury condition mentioned feeling skeptical about other para athletes in her sport class, as she feels at a disadvantage by competing against some other impairments that might not have the same impact on performance as hers. Additionally, as noted by the Brazilian participant, subjectivity can be observed in the individual perceptions of classifiers within a specific classification panel. Although the paraswimming classification manual serves as a guide, personal misinterpretation can negatively impact the subtraction of points and the final score of a test, potentially leading to a misclassification. And this last one has been identified as a major ethical concern, as most para athletes have a feeling of having been misclassified at some point in their careers. It mostly occurs at the national level due to not having a monitoring system coming from the International Federation, according to a Colombian para athlete. Also, the assessment results of the bench and water tests can leave para swimmers in a borderline case, where a few points separate them from a lower or higher class, provoking reassessment requests as reflected by an Argentinian expert. Lastly, the biggest threat to Paralympic classification is recognized by a second Colombian participant who reflects on the deceiving behaviors of misrepresenting skills or abilities to gain advantage and be favored with a lower sport class. Understanding the geographical nuances allow us to evaluate what sports development. For example, rehabilitation can be a basic right in some parts of the world, where in others is a privilege. An Argentinian expert reflects that if a social and cultural shift comes into place, it will be reflected within sports, hence in classification. A proper support system, knowledge, and a specialized workforce will impact athletes' career success. Therefore, their careers might be directly influenced and determined on a higher scale by their entourage and the support provided by their country, community, federation, and National Paralympic Committee, sometimes based on convenience in terms of a nation's capacity, as addressed by the Portuguese expert. When it comes to the scientific-based approach, these perceptions and concerns are reflected in the way that para-athletes identify the gaps within the para-swimming classification code and invite the International Federation to evolve a further understanding of the underlying medical conditions not fully considered. Therefore, measuring limitations of performance across the different eligible impairment types is required to keep a continuous improvement of the evaluation tables in the classification manual. By that, our athletes suggested key areas of improvement. First, to have an objective justification for the wider community, but foremost to them, where clearly defined guidelines can be provided if a specific impairment profile is reallocated. This will ensure regaining trust in the process, then increasing the classification personnel and evaluation opportunities, to avoid subjectivity and misses on the evaluation due to a lack of capacity, which will reduce misclassifications. In my research, I propose the application of the fair equality of opportunity principle as the backbone of a fair ethical approach. Fundamentally, it considers education and accessibility as the baseline and promotes an oversight of the standards put in place to promote a classification system as fair as it can be. Therefore, the following recommendations are proposed based on the findings and application of the fairness model for further development of test measurements through peer collaboration by relying on experts from academia and the participant community. Classification protocols enhancement, which should be extended beyond assessments in competition to encourage a preventive measure when ethical concerns arise. It promotes fairness through continuous regulation. In addition, the inclusion of technology for proper assessments and predictability, such as underwater cameras, AI models, and data performance analytics, can be explored. Oversight of NPC's national classification systems. While protocols are standardized, there's little control over the operations of national classification frameworks. Ensuring the mitigation of systemic failures and promoting a level playing field must be a priority when it comes to classification opportunities, the classification outcomes, and legalization of sport classes in a national setting. Community engagement through education and the media to reach a degree of acceptance of the competition formats and the diversity of impairments within the same class of the same impairment type among classes. Lastly, exploring a multi-reward system based on impairment profiles between sport classes by weighting a calculation of relevant parameters. This could promote and recognize the competitive efforts of impairments historically not present on the podium. This has been an ongoing dilemma for the last 30 years in parasport classification. This research was performed considering the classification code version of 2015, although by the time of the publication of the dissertation, the 2025 code version was pre-released. The new edition of this new code were not considered for this research. There's no perfect system, but as the world evolves, we should strive to move along with it, working in synergy with all stakeholders within the parasport community. And with a para-athlete center approach, we promote structural changes in how the system operates, placing at the forefront the voices of those directly impacted by the system and who envision a fairer system to look at. Thank you.